Energy for life. Ross Adam. We breathe energy. We depend on energy. We produce energy. We transform energy into brilliant ideas for a greener planet. For medicine. For clean water. For safer food. For our future. Energy for life. Ross Adam. We breathe energy.
Here we move to the second week of COP26. The first week was concentrated with climate debates, announcements. And there were really sound voices in favor of nuclear power as a mean of carbon decarbonization and carbon neutrality, and our goal to achieve net zero. So I would like to start our discussion, the discussion devoted to clear atom nuclear energy. This discussion organized and hosted by Rosatom Corporation, State Atomic Energy Corporation. And I would like our speakers to limit their speech by 5 minutes, 5-6 minutes. And would like to present our panel, the speakers in the panel. So I think it's very interesting. It's very nice speakers. And let me introduce Kirill Komarov, First Deputy Director General for Development and International Business of Rosatom. Sama Bilbao y Leon, Director General of World Nuclear Association. Clarine Debossison, Chief Sustainability Officer at Electricité de France. And Tom Sampson, am I right?
Yes.
Okay. Chief Executive Officer of Rolls-Royce SMR Consortium. So, first of all, I would like to start with welcoming notes of Rafael Grossi, who is Director General of International Atomic Energy Agency. So, and please.
Greetings to you all participating in the Clean Atoms Day in the Russian Federation. It is a pleasure to address you today. As you can see, I'm recording this event, and you can see by the background here, at the COP26 Climate Change Conference in Scotland, in Glasgow. And what we are bringing here is a message that I'm sure comes across and is also at the heart of your deliberations there. The role of nuclear energy for a decarbonized economy, for economies that can grow powered by this clean, stable source of energy. And of course, the fact that this event is taking place in Russia is so important because Russia has 70 years or more of a legacy of excellence in this important scientific and technological activity. It was already in 1954 that the reactor at Obninsk started feeding the power grids in Russia. So it's no surprise that this has continued. And Russian scientists and technologists are making great strides in areas like small and modular reactors and advanced form and designs of reactors. So as Director General of the IAEA, I'm very pleased to join you today to wish you an excellent conference and to commit ourselves as a community working for the peaceful uses of nuclear energy to continue doing that in the way we are doing for a safer and cleaner planet.
Okay. Thank you to Mr. Grossi for welcoming notes. So we are coming back to COP26, to our room. So let me introduce myself. I think I didn't introduce myself. My name is Igor Karatetsky. I'm partner with KPMG and will be your moderator today and will moderate the discussion, our discussion. So I would like to start with the first question. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Komarov. So, I think we talk about Russia, a little bit about Russia. Mm-hmm. Russia recently committed to net zero. Vladimir Putin committed to net zero, so in 2060. And we also approved our strategy for economic development with low carbon emissions. So, and as I remember, one of the scenarios, the target scenario, includes the nuclear power increase in energy mix from 20% to 25%. So taking this into account, I suggest that the nuclear power, one of the significant pillar in Russian low carbon development. And also I know that Rosatom not just a state corporation, it's not just a national player, not just a Russian company. You have also have some projects in overseas. As I know, you built about nine power stations, yes?
9 countries.
9 countries, okay, nine
Much
countries.
more, much more
Okay,
units.
okay. 9 countries, and you build power stations in 9 countries overseas. So, and I think you have some insights on this. So, I mean, probably you feel some shifting in demand regarding the nuclear power, taking into account so the parameters of nuclear power. So I mean low carbon parameters of nuclear power. So can you provide us with some insights and your feelings on this?
Thank you very much, Igor, for your question. Good morning, everybody, and let me start to talk with our own country. You're right, today nuclear, it's the biggest source of clean energy in our country. It's more than 20% as to the end of previous year. This year we will see, but I do not believe that it will decrease. And it's very important that our government decided to increase the source of electricity up to 25% on average. Honestly, in European part of Russia, it's now even more. It's above 40% because the majority of our nuclear power plants are located in the European part of country. But the goal is, you're right, to increase the average quantity of nuclear power up to 25% of energy balance in our country. And it's not only due to documents and decisions you mentioned about our net zero goals, about strategy of our economical development. What is also very important, especially here in all this international discussion, that our government in September officially approved so-called Russian National Green Taxonomy, and our government officially included nuclear energy in this taxonomy. It was a very important step because we see a lot of discussion in different countries include or doesn't include. We see a big battle in Europe, but honestly speaking, from my personal point of view, we see more and more European countries who are strongly pro-nuclear, and this quantity of countries is increasing. Let me remind you that it was start of just a very famous letter of 7 countries, as I remember. Now afterwards it was 10. Now Netherlands already joined the same club, and we see now that the countries who are as a minimum neutral to nuclear energy, as a maximum optimistically pro-nuclear, it's a very growing quantity of countries, not only in Europe, but all over the world. If you see the majority of big economies in the world, China, India, Middle East, Southeast Asia, the majority of these countries decided to develop nuclear and develop very strongly, especially China and India, for example. And I think that it's due to 2 facts. One, being here on climate conference, is very important to mention it, that definitely nuclear, it's a source of energy with the lowest quantity of CO2 emissions in comparison even with renewable sources of energy. But second very important argument is that nuclear, it's very reliable and sustainable source of energy, because very often when we talk about ESG agenda, we are too much concentrated only on climate issues. But ESG, it's not only about climate. ESG, it's about reliable and sustainable development. And if you look, what does it mean, the project of construction of nuclear power plant in each and every country? First of all, it's a very huge impulse for the economical growth, for the national GDP growth of the hosting country. Doesn't matter, is it a technology of this country or it's some export technology. In all cases, the average level of localization starts from 25% or even above, depends on a country. It means a lot of new jobs. It's a lot of development in scientific and educational area. It's a new level of life. It's a new level of health. It's a lot of advantages for the people. And I think where now a lot of governments are looking for a clean and sustainable source of energy, they are very seriously thinking about nuclear, because nuclear fits both purposes, fits both goals. And working all over the world, yes, you are right, we are now constructing nuclear power plants in 9 countries. We have portfolio of our projects in even more quantity of countries, in 12 of them, and we are in permanent talks with different governments from different continents. We see a very strong, not just interest, but demand to develop nuclear. And I believe that it's not just momentum, it's a very stable solution, it's a very stable track of development, and I believe that we will see more and more countries involved to the nuclear development all over the world.
Mr. Komarov, thank you. I absolutely agree that we not just need to look at climate, but also look at reliability and sustainability and other factors I suggest, because it's not just climate. We also need to take into account environment. And now I would like to move to Karine. So Electricité de France, so I think one of the leading companies, from a perspective of ESG. I know that you are one of the leaders in the ESG area. So maybe you can provide us with insights and maybe share your experience regarding your priorities in ESG, your priorities in low carbon technologies, I don't know, probably maybe hydrogen or any other technologies.
Yeah, so thank you very much for having me. Maybe just to remind everyone, so EDF is the French national electricity company, but we're actually not just French. It's about 165,000 employees around the world. We are the leading nuclear operator. And actually, maybe you don't know that, but we are the world's largest generator of electricity with 0 direct carbon emission. I think Rosatom is not far behind us. So, and I think this is very important because, as it was mentioned before, the urgency means that we cannot afford to not use all the low carbon technology that are mature, that are competitive, and of course that includes nuclear. So how do we position nuclear in the ESG vision? EDF has basically put in its corporate bylaws what we call raison d'être in French, which is our purpose. Why do we wake up every day to work at EDF? And there are 4 pillars in this corporate mission. One is carbon neutrality. One is preservation of resources, including biodiversity. One is well-being, and the last one is economic development. And if you look at these 4 pillars, nuclear and renewable together fits perfectly. And I think they are very complementary. And this is what we've been actually trying to push towards all our stakeholders in ESG, is that if you want to succeed, being a sustainable company, having a license to operate, you need to have a diversification of your assets, but you need to put as much money as possible, of course, in what is competitive and mature. And today, both nuclear and renewables are competitive and mature, right? So, of course, they don't fit the same purpose, as we know, because renewables are intermittent. So nuclear, and that's one of the things we've been developing in France as well, we can modulate so that we can move around the load of renewables, and that's why they are very complementary together. So basically today, what we do in every project that we select, we have to respond to these 4 pillars of our corporate mission. And in terms of the development of nuclear, of course today, one of the biggest challenge for us is to extend the life of the existing assets, because that's the most competitive thing you can do. And of course to renew our fleet, because we will need new capacity by 2050, of course, even by 2030. So we have a plan to develop new reactors in France, both from the EPR technology that we have, but also SMR. And that's of course a very important need, the SMR, specifically in countries which have coal assets and want to close their coal assets. We think the SMR is a perfect tool to respond to these needs. And we also have a lot of prospects like Rosatom outside of France, because exactly as was mentioned, there is a strong need for baseload, reliable power, decarbonize, and of course nuclear fits that agenda.
Okay, thank you. So, as I understand, you said about renewables. Can you please share the
You mentioned about hydrogen.
hydrogen and maybe the split of energy mix.
Yes. So, I mean, today most of our energy clearly is coming from nuclear, but we are the biggest hydro company in Europe as well. So, hydro and nuclear are 97% of our mix with renewables as well, but renewable is still small compared to nuclear and hydro. Okay, so that's the majority will be nuclear and hydro, but we have an objective to more than double our renewable capacity by 2030. Okay, so we will have, we hope, about 60 gigawatts of renewable by 2030, maybe even more if we have a good regulation, because we haven't talked about regulation, but clearly the volatility in electricity prices in the market doesn't work for nuclear because it's highly capital intensive. You need regulated prices. You need to make your investment knowing what will be the price. Okay, so we've been working in the UK, for example, in our nuclear station, we have what we call a contract for difference. So there is a strike price, and if the market price is higher, we give the money back to the consumer. If the market price is lower, then we get the difference with our strike price. That's one way of regulation. The other way would be what we are working for our next station in the UK, which is called the regulated asset-based model, which is what the grid, for example, have in the UK. And that's something which we think is very critical if we want to really be fast in developing new nuclear in Europe.
Okay. So
and hydrogen. Sorry, I forgot your last point. So, of course, we think hydrogen is something that makes a lot of sense, but of course, it has to be competitive. So we come back to the issue of competitiveness. What we like with nuclear and hydrogen together is that, as you know, there's a lot of heat coming from the nuclear energy process. So we think there is a good combination between nuclear and the use of heating, also for hydrogen hub with big industrial hub. So that's what we've been actually putting on the agenda in the UK with our new project called Sizewell C. So we will first use an electrolyzer on our old site, Sizewell B, and we will have our lorries, our trucks, so all the construction site will be decarbonized thanks to the hydrogen with the electrolyzer.
Okay.
And then we're trying to basically form some form of industrial hub to use the heat and to process the hydrogen there as well. But generally, our hydrogen strategy is about transport and big industries that electricity cannot be used so easily to decarbonize. Okay, so transport, for example, in France, is 30% of the CO2 emission. This is the biggest CO2 emitting sector in France. So this is where we are focusing our energy on the hydrogen strategy.
Okay. So your strategy is nuclear power, and you exploring other sources like an
nuclear and renewable together, complementary. So both of them, we want to be the leader.
Okay. Thank you. So I would like to move to Sama Leon. So you representing an international organization, World Nuclear Association, and as you know, during pandemic you held some seminars, strategic sessions in format of electronic forums.
Right.
And I understand, I suggest you discussed a lot of issues with experts, vendors, service providers, and other people in the market. And I suggest you have some insights from these discussions. So, and my questions, the first question, so can you please share your experience from these sessions? And the second question, do you think, so reformulate, so we see that climate change and we see people in the city, the pressure from climate perspective is very high, and we see the urgent for climate actions. So do you see and feel any changes in this area for taking into account the urgency of climate changes?
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here and talk to all of you. So maybe for some of you that are not familiar with World Nuclear Association, we really represent the global nuclear industry. And this means we are more than 185 member companies in 44 countries in all continents. And what I think is very important also is that our members do cover the entire nuclear fuel cycle. So we have mining companies, conversion, enrichment, fuel fabrication, obviously utilities, obviously the vendors and the suppliers, the designers of the technology, but also the back end of the fuel cycle. Also, we are talking about companies that are working with radioactive waste management, with used nuclear fuel, and obviously decommissioning. And then last but not least, which is super important, is this entire ecosystem of companies that support the global nuclear industry. For example, nuclear law, for example, nuclear insurance, for example, financing, transport. So that is the strength of an of our organization, where we can really talk about the many different areas that are taking place in nuclear. So you are right. The pandemic has been challenging, because one of the things that I would say that World Nuclear Association is more effective at is to convene the stakeholders in different topics and to try to discuss and address these topics. And obviously, in the middle of the pandemic, this was not as easy. So, and yes, of course, we can do this via Zoom, but all of you know that it's not as effective, right? So we really work our best to make sure that we brought in the virtual room all the stakeholders that were working in these different areas. So, but at the same time, we saw a silver lining, because sometimes in the olden days it was not possible to bring in the same room literally all the players. However, now that we can do some of those things virtually, it is actually feasible to bring many of those people together in the same room. So I think that in the last year and a half, 18 months, we have been able to achieve this relatively good balance between convening all the stakeholders and actually achieving goals that actually move the case for nuclear a little bit further. So as far as lessons learned, so the very first area that we focused this year was financing. And Corinne mentioned this, and I'm sure we will discuss, and also Kirill mentioned this. As you know, nuclear is a capital-intensive energy source, as all the other low-carbon energy sources are. So it is absolutely essential to secure affordable financing for nuclear projects. So that was the discussion that we had in the first e-forum, trying to figure out what are the frameworks, and of course, Corinne mentioned some of those that are going to facilitate, what are the policies, what are the market structures that are going to somehow incentivize investors, incentivize the financing community to see nuclear as a technology in which they want to invest. Then the second of we also had another e-forum on innovation, which is incredibly important because, and of course we have discussed this, it is very important to bring these new technologies and incorporate them in a cost-effective and expeditious manner into nuclear. So when we are looking at, for example, digitalization, artificial intelligence, advanced manufacturing, all those things can be used very effectively in nuclear. Some of them are already being used, but we were able to convene colleagues from all these technologies to give us ideas on how to incorporate these technologies. And then very quickly, one of the other ones that we had that I think is important here, we actually convened several of our companies that have already made a net zero pledge. So we wanted to bring good examples of companies, how the nuclear industry not only is contributing to decarbonization because of the product that we produce, which is low carbon electricity and low carbon heat, which is incredibly important, but also many of our companies are already committed to net zero, which tells you that there is a serious commitment to this decarbonization inside the industry. And then very quickly, your second question. I think that there is a little bit of a turning on the opinion. I think that more and more people are starting to reconsider whether nuclear is something that needs to be included in their portfolio for decarbonization. I won't tell you that suddenly everybody's pro-nuclear, because that's not where we are just yet. But I mean, in particular in Europe, after these few months where we have had very high prices of electricity, and in some cases we have seen that the gas reserves were very, very tight, and people were wondering whether they were going to be able to afford their electricity, or whether they were going to be able to come home tomorrow and they were going to flip the switch and the lights were going to come come on or not. I think that a lot of people are starting to consider that there really is a need to bring in all the proven, low carbon, reliable, round-the-clock technologies that we have, and people are starting to look much more carefully and much more open-mindedly to nuclear technology.
Low carbon, low price, and reliable.
Thank you.
So, okay, we move forward. I would like to ask a question to Tom Samson. Mr. Grossi mentioned already the SMR. So it looks like this is a less risky technology from the budget and from timing. But at the same, from the other hand, there is not the same situation taking into account greenhouse gas emissions, comparing to big power plants, nuclear power plants. So do you see and feel, some requests regarding climate change in relation to SMR? And maybe you can also share with us some insights regarding environmental impact of SMR.
Yeah, and thank you, Igor, and thank you, Rosatom, for inviting me along to join the panel today. No, I think absolutely our purpose with the Rolls-Royce SMR has been to design a radically different approach to how we build nuclear power plants. And what we've done is we've combined the rich history we have in Rolls-Royce in designing and manufacturing reactors for our submarine business with our experience in building factories and manufacturing highly complex engineered products in our aerospace industry to build something in a factory. So the difference with our SMR is it's trying to eradicate as much as we can the construction risk, and it's trying to build as much of the product in a factory environment, including on site. So one of the first things we do on site, we build a factory. That allows us to manage productivity, protects us from the weather, and it allows us to help drive down the cost and improve the deliverability of the technology. We've also made the choice to use existing technology. So our design is based on a proven PWR with standard fuel. The size of our plant allows us to buy our steam turbines from the market. They're commercially and readily available, all of which helps us drive down the cost. And we've had 4 real criteria to design this facility over the last 5-6 years. Low cost, which is using proven technology, as I say, make it deployable with confidence, so maximizing the amount of work that's done in a factory, make it global and scalable, because to your point, these are smaller than large, but we think we can either put multiple units on a site or provide SMRs to many, many more customers who haven't got the capital to buy a large project. So it's a scalable product as well as global. And the final point I think is also very important. We've designed this to make it investable. So we want to attract private capital to help build out this type of technology, not just in the UK, but globally, to help countries and industries who need a clean energy solution to use SMR and nuclear as part of their portfolio. We see that opportunity now. Many companies are looking at 2030 and beyond. They're doing the math, renewable plus storage, or other solutions that are base load, because that firm power element is really important to many, many industries and consumers, and so they need a firm power solution. And we're trying to bring forward a low cost and deployable solution that then they can finance and then own themselves as well as an asset. So we see our contribution to the clean energy agenda in that way, that it's not just a small product, it's a small product, but we hopefully are going to sell many of them.
What about the environment?
Yeah, well, I think our footprint is, compared to a large project, is much smaller. So one of our SMRs produces about 470 megawatts, so it's a reasonable size power plant. That allows us to put it on many nuclear decommissioned sites around the world where they've had an asset producing nuclear power for the last 50 years or so. So we can deploy the smaller technologies on those sites. The footprint's about 2 football pitches, so it's a very kind of manageable site footprint for giving us flexibility on location. And we also have now built in cooling towers as our standard cooling solution, so we can maximize the flexibility on where we can locate our SMR. And it's absolutely in the same quality of the other nuclear technologies on the large side, because it's producing 24/7 clean energy and contributing to climate change in that way. And I think there is, in my sense, it's my first COP, but I'm really getting the sense of the narrative that nuclear is now being seen firmly as part of the solution and not a problem. And that's a real turning point for me in the industry, that we're seen as contributing to clean energy. We've got technology, we can deploy it now, and we can really make a difference.
Okay, Tom, thank you. So we discussed technologies, trends, and different insights of people in the market. So I would like to move to thing you also mentioned. So I think financing. So and because absolutely, if you would like to implement some technologies, if you would like to implement some carbon neutral solutions, we need financing. So I would like to start with Karin. Because you have some experience, I think, in Europe and green financing. So what is the experience of EDF, Electricité de France, regarding the sustainable finance and green finance, and were there any specific requirements in relation to nuclear companies?
Yeah, I mean, EDF was the first corporate to issue a green bond, sizable green bond. It was 1.4 billion back in 2013. At that time, the corporate green bond market was 7 billion, so we were a big chunk of it. Today, if you look at green bond plus sustainable bonds plus social bonds, it's about $600 billion year to date. So you've seen this market has grown exponentially. But green in the European world doesn't include nuclear, okay? And that's the biggest fight we have today, because as was mentioned, Russia, Canada, China, I mean, to be honest, there are like 250 taxonomy today, right? But a lot of them includes nuclear, but not yet the European Union. We are waiting for this to happen. We are, I would say, it's hard to make a call, right? Because it's highly political, as we know. But I think what we've heard recently was the fact that there was no proof of exclusion based on the do not significant harm argument, which was used by the opponents to say, well, okay, it's good for climate, but everything else is bad, okay? But eventually, the European Union mandated the Joint Research Center, so they are research center of the EU, and they published a very exhaustive report saying that we cannot say that nuclear is worse than any other technology in terms of the environment. So we'll see whether we will succeed or not, but of course this is a very important aspect of the financing. If nuclear is not included in the taxonomy, for example, for my company, it's half of my capex and my revenues, which will be excluded from being taxonomy compliant. So it's not a small impact for a company like mine, okay? Now, the question is the taxonomy operable today in the way it's being done? That's another question, right? Because if it's becoming too complex, nobody will use it, right? So there is a challenge to make it relevant, to put the money where it needs to be put as fast as possible, right? And that is very tricky for all corporates, I think, today, because we are snowed under questionnaire, reporting, and at the end, you lose the sense of it. You do reporting for reporting, right? But why do we do it? We need to move fast to deploy the capital. It has to be competitive, as was mentioned. So we need to be clear that nuclear is a benefit for climate, right? As we said, so emergency is here. And if we prove that there is no do not significant harm aspect, which is what we have to do in terms of the waste management, in terms of the recycling of the fuel. So, of course, there is a huge responsibility of all the nuclear operators to prove us right that we are responsible companies in the way we manage the full cycle. But if we are fitting these criteria, then I think we should be able to fit in the taxonomy. That's why we are hoping for, right? But if there was no nuclear in the taxonomy, it doesn't mean that we cannot do nuclear in terms of financing, but that means that we will rely more on our government to give the right signal as well in terms of regulation. That was mentioned earlier. Regulation is key. We need to have a visible price view for us to invest and for investors to put money like low carbon technology, like renewable as well, right? They benefited from feed-in tariff, etc. We need the same for nuclear if we want to go as fast as needed to deploy what is needed for the Paris Agreement.
One more question. Do you have any credits linked to ESG ratings?
Yes, so you're right. In terms of the toolbox, so we have today 7 billion of green bonds. We have 1.25 billion of social bonds. And actually, it's a very interesting argument. On social bonds, we are putting nuclear because nuclear brings local employment. So when we issued our social bonds in the market, we said that we will measure the impact on jobs from the capex we put to the small and medium-sized companies. And a lot of it is nuclear. Okay, 225,000 jobs in France are linked to nuclear. So it's a massive impact. And when we talk about just transition, which is also a very big aspect of the climate discussion, you cannot do the transition without people. It has to be done with and for people, right? Because otherwise, the yellow vest happen in France. We've seen what happened. Very violent riot, okay? We've seen what happened in Chile. That's why the COP happened in Madrid and not in Chile as well. So we need to make the transition with people. We need to have good, decent jobs, and nuclear is also responding to that. So through the social bond, we finance nuclear, okay? And then we have also KPI, ESG KPI for our loans. So for example, I have my carbon trajectory as a KPI. I have my number of electric vehicles as a KPI. I can have diversity as a KPI. So better I am in terms of ESG, lower is my rate in terms of financing. It's a virtuous circle, and we are very keen to make sure that there is a virtuous link between finance and corporate social responsibility.
Okay, thank you. So let's see how developments in green taxonomy in Europe, because in Russia we already included
Well done.
nuclear. So I would like to move to Russian experience and to Mr. Komarov. So you mentioned, and I mentioned, that we included nuclear in green taxonomy in Russia. So can you please share your experience of Rosatom in relation to financing of nuclear power stations and your projects?
Thank you, Igor. Yes, taxonomy is very important, but we should understand that bank system, money system of the world is not national, it's international. That's why we still need to have some consensus between different states, different countries, different continents. The majority of them should vote pro-nuclear. Only in this case, the finance will be available for nuclear purposes. But nevertheless, we are not waiting for something. We are on our way, and it's a very well-known fact. We are executing the first so-called BO project in nuclear, build on operate. We are doing it in Turkey on Akku site. We are constructing 4 nuclear units on the base of this model. When we are designer of the plant, when we construct this plant for our money and for our own risk, and then we sell the electricity for Turkish government for the fixed price. And it's definitely very important to create financial sources for such a type of a project. And what we succeeded already, it's a very interesting example for us. We attracted already $400 million for financing for such project on the base of ESG principles and on the base of green principles. We have some indicators, some obligations, like, for example, regular environmental monitoring and annual reports about this monitoring. We have some specific requirements for our sub-suppliers, some process of certification of these suppliers to be able to check that everything is based on green and sustainable technologies, and some other aspects, but they allowed us to have more cheaper financing than regular is. And we believe that it's just a beginning, it's just a start. The more we officially name nuclear as a green source of energy, the more officially we include it in different type of taxonomies in different countries, the more available are sources on the financial market. Because look, all banks, very difficult to find a bank which can work only in frames of national system, and at the same time will be available for financing of nuclear projects, because nuclear projects requires a lot of money usually, and means the bank should be ready to work not only with rubles. Bank should be able to work with all international financial resources. That's why we need, the majority in naming nuclear green and sustainable.
Okay. Thank you. I would like to move to the UK experience. So we see that not many countries at this moment invest in nuclear power, but at the same time, UK is investing. We see Rolls-Royce also. You mentioned SMR technology, and I understand that you invest in the technology and would like to develop it. So when we're talking about the project in, project in nuclear power station or SMR project, you need huge investments, so you need to finance it. At the same time, you face the low price, regulatory price, so you need to find the balance.
Right.
So you mentioned about the regulatory asset-based model in UK. So as a solution. And also have some numbers. As I know, the UK government going to invest about 250 million pounds in this project, and also seeking for private investments in amount of 300 million pounds. So my question, so taking this all into account, so this background, which investors in UK are interested investing in nuclear power? And what are the drivers for this investor to invest in this project?
So the money you mentioned there is actually the money that will fund Rolls-Royce SMR Limited. We're creating a standalone company that will be majority owned by Rolls-Royce, and we're bringing in new capital investors alongside Rolls-Royce. We'll probably be announcing that in the next day or two up in the UK. We've secured the 210 million grant funding from the government, and that's going to be combined with that private capital. So that's to fund the technology development that will allow us to enter the generic design assessment process with the regulators in the UK and take the technology forward. But in parallel to that, we want to now secure deployment commitments so we can start delivering the technology here in the UK and globally. So our next focus then is how do we bring in financial solutions to enable us to deploy the technology. And as everybody said, the taxonomy is a huge piece because there's something of a dilemma. We listen to all the world financial institutions saying they have trillions and trillions of pounds and dollars to invest in clean energy, and we have nuclear that is looking for accessing that money. So we've got to somehow bridge the gap. I think our goal to do that is by designing a technology that is lower risk, lower cost. By using the factory-based model, we can create a predictable factory-built commodity. That creates a lower risk solution for investors, so that helps attract capital. And also on top of that, we also need to look to the government to create the right policy frameworks, whether it's the CFD, whether it's a regulated asset base, to provide some certain commitments in terms of the deployment of technology in various countries. But we're also seeing, particularly with the smaller capital needed for SMR, now industrials looking to deploy SMR technology directly. So we're moving away from nuclear being a state sovereign decision in countries to being a solution to help industries and commercial companies solve their own clean energy needs. So we're talking with industrialists, we're talking to major companies who have large volumes of constant needs for clean electricity, data center companies that want to produce synthetic fuels, because nuclear has also got an important role to play, not just in grid-connected electricity, the traditional history of the industry, but to combine nuclear, as we've said, about producing hydrogen, synthetic aviation fuel, and also many off-grid applications that can also then benefit from the flexibility of an SMR. So it's really a combination. Ultimately, we've got to deliver low-cost, cost-competitive energy to consumers, but we've got to finance it with a range of private capital, government support, and hopefully industrials and corporations investing in the technology.
Okay, just to clarify, am I right that any industrial company can buy SMR and decrease scope 2 in production in their greenhouse gas emissions? So there is no limitation from government?
So again, it depends on the various structures, but I mean, essentially, what my ambition with this SMR is to kind of create a nuclear IPP, so an independent power producer that's owned by financial institutions, is an operator who operates the asset, we have a turnkey contract to deliver a fully integrated power plant, and then there's an offtake, whether it's a CFD, whether it's a PPA, And so that's how much of the combined cycle world was exploited over the last 30 years and rapidly expanded and delivering power plants around the world by bringing in private capital with technology and operations and offtake. And so I think there's a way that SMR can try to create that kind of ecosystem to make nuclear more accessible to many, many more countries and corporations and businesses over the next 10, 20, 30 years.
If you allow me to add some couple of words, we are doing now a very similar model already in real life. We have a very big copper mine in the north of Russia, in Chukotka. It's a very far away region, not connected with a centralized electricity grid with the country. It's a very big mine, as far as I know. It's when it will be developed finally, it will be the biggest copper mine in the world. And the problem is that the total lack of electricity, because the mine is very well known since middle of previous century, but it was not possible to develop it because of lack of electricity. And what we did just recently in September, we signed, as Tom said, very similar model. We signed a contract with the owner of this mine that we are constructing 4 floating nuclear power plants with a total capacity of approximately 400 megawatts to supply electricity to this mine during 40 years. And why we were chosen by this company to do this? Because it's not a governmental project. It's a totally private story, because we are financing this from banks on the base of this offtake of electricity. Yep. It will be take or pay contract for the whole amount of capacity. But why they have chosen? Initially, it was a story that initial idea was to use LNG because as a source of energy, because we have a lot of gas and we have a lot of LNG in the north of Russia on the Arctic shore. But when they started to discuss the potential price for electricity, and they are interested to have a contract for next 40 years, 40, because it's a lifetime of this mine. And nobody is ready on the base of natural resources to guarantee any fixed or even predictable price for electricity, because everybody will tell, okay, gas is now X dollar megawatt per hour, then it will be twice more, or maybe like we see now 10 times more or 20 times more, and it's immediately reflected to the cost of electricity. Because if you look at a gas plant or coal plant, 80% of the cost of final cost of electricity, it's the cost of fuel. In nuclear power plant, it's less than 3% if you are talking about natural uranium. That's why we are able, being at the same time owner of uranium resources, we are able to sign a very long-term contract for 40 years, and we just did it. And it will be just first model for us, but it's now has a very strong interest. A lot of big companies are going to us asking, is it possible to repeat the same schemes? That's why I believe that what Tom is saying, it's it's very real, sounds very realistic. It definitely still needs a lot of governmental resources in question of regulations, because in this case, Tom, we do not supply a plant, we supply an electricity. We remain an owner of the plant, and we remain an operator, and it's not so easy to be operator of the nuclear power plant. But with the assistance of government, with the assistance of regulations, we are able to realize the model.
Thank you, Zisha. So very interesting. So, and my questions goes to Sam Leon. So about green financing and green taxonomy in Europe. So what is your expectations? What is your foresight regarding?
Expectation.
Yeah.
So I forgot at home my crystal ball. Sorry. No. So well, I mean.
So your highest expectation.
Yeah,
okay.
my expectation. So no, we've heard from Korean. So it's been a little bit back and forth. But we have seen that a number of countries in the European Union are becoming much more vocal as far as the importance that they place in ensuring that this taxonomy is going to be science-based and is going to be technology neutral, which of course means that nuclear energy will need to be part of the technologies that are considered as sustainable. And of course, we already heard that there's already the science there, because the report that the Joint Research Center provided was a solid report that provided all the information that is needed for the policymakers to understand that nuclear energy is in fact just as sustainable as all the other low carbon energy sources that are currently already included. So I really am thinking that particularly in view of what we discussed earlier, the very serious spikes in price of electricity and the maybe the energy insecurity that some countries have experienced, I really think that hopefully cool heads will prevail and nuclear energy will be included in a same footing as other low carbon energy sources in the taxonomy. But the other thing that I wanted to say though, and we've discussed this, the EU taxonomy is obviously very important. It has become incredibly visible, so we all have been paying attention to this. But as Corinne and Kirill mentioned, there is a lot of initiatives all over the place, all over the world, to put in place ESG financing, climate financing, sustainable financing, whichever way you want to call it. So we from World Nuclear Association, we really are paying a lot of attention. We are trying to map all these different initiatives because unfortunately they are all different. They are not meshing very well with each other. Some of them have some expectations, some of them have different expectations. So we are trying to keep an eye, we are trying to map all of them, trying to figure out how does nuclear technology fit in all these ESG and climate financing efforts. Because as we said, it is really essential that all the low carbon technologies that exist right now are deployed as quickly as possible. I mean, otherwise we stand no chance to meet these 1.5 degrees goals that we have. But of course, for that we are going to need financing. We are going to need affordable financing. So it is very important that all these ESG frameworks are going to recognize the value of all low carbon technologies, of course, including nuclear. So yeah, so we are working on that, and it's incredibly important.
Okay, so like some summary of our discussion. So we discussed the trends, and absolutely the nuclear power is climate neutral, low carbon, low price, reliable, sustainable. So that's absolutely clear.
Yes.
At the same time, we need affordable investment because it's a huge project. Yeah. And also we need support from government, at least in terms of taxonomy. So in Russia already implemented, so now the turn for Europe. So I also understand some support from regulation, making the environment in this area more favor for private investments.
Yeah. And if I may say as well, international regulatory collaboration.
Collaboration.
Yeah,
So that
collaboration.
we don't have every country trying to regulate and make it difficult to deploy the technology, that somehow the regulators collaborate and try to create some more common frameworks.
Okay. If anybody wants to make a final remarks.
I just wanted to share one thing. I've been having lots of conversations the last week, and I got asked this really interesting question from somebody not inside the nuclear industry. And they said, if somebody was to come back to speak to you from the future and they would say 3 things to you, what might they say that would kind of highlight this issue? I say, well, they could come back and say, you had the solution, you didn't deploy enough of it, and look what happened. So nuclear is essential to tackle climate change. We need to collaborate better as an industry and more to talk to people outside of our industry, to change people's perceptions, and we need to try to really tackle this issue around financing, taxonomy, and how we access the capital. If you get the access to the capital, we change public perception. There's no reason why nuclear in the next 10, 20, 30 years can have a massive impact on climate change. Looking back the last 20 years, we didn't do enough nuclear. We should have done 2 or 3 or 4 times as much.
Yes.
We've got to make up for that in the next 3 decades.
Okay.
So if you allow me, very positive signs that we are sitting here on COP26 and talking about nuclear. Because I remember just 5 years ago when it was COP22 in Marrakesh, it was very difficult even to have a permission from the management of the conversation to have some nuclear talks. And it was our common event together with Agneta Riesing, who was predecessor of Summer in World Nuclear Association. We had more journalists on this very, very small event than all event in comparison during this Marrakesh session. And it means for me that we are on the right track. It's very optimistic sign that we are here and we are discussing nuclear. But I agree with Tom. It was a very long break in massive nuclear construction all over the world, and we need now to do much more. We need now to be much more active than in previous time period to compensate this break and to bring back nuclear on a position which nuclear should be.
So can I ask? So I would like to add to what you both just said. I mean, I think it is true. The nuclear community, we do need to work together, maybe even better than we've done it. There is a urgency that we need to instill on ourselves to take advantage of this window of opportunity that we have right now. I think that we have regained some of these lost know-how and skills, but I think that we are back and we can start building very fast. So this is on us. But at the same time, I think that it's just as important that the policymakers, I mean, governments, they have a very important role, and they really need to be bold. They need to. I mean, sometimes they need to be courageous, politically courageous. I mean, because sometimes nuclear is not the most popular solution immediately, but of course, when you actually take the right decisions, that actually can make a huge difference. And so, if we have bold politicians, bold policymakers that can instill confidence in the financial markets, that are going to put in place policies that provide a level playing field for all low carbon technologies, that is going to be enormously important.
I think on my side, I would like to finish on education. I think if you look in France, I think there was a survey that shows that more than 80% of the 16 to 24 years old thought that nuclear emits CO2.
Right.
So we have this massive challenge to make things right on the first understanding of climate. Okay, so when you see, the smoke outside of the chimney, it's not CO2. Okay, it's water. Okay, so this is the basic, but this is where we also have to work and start to make sure that everybody, every citizen, understand the basics of climate. Once this is done, because now they feel the impact, we see the extreme weather events, so they know there is no, there's a bit of climate skeptics, but not many more, right? But they still don't see nuclear sometimes as being good for climate. So we first need to do this education, and then we talk a lot about the E, but I think the S, and I mentioned the just transition, the S is rising massively. The biodiversity as well. Land use for nuclear is super positive compared to other sources of technology or low carbon technology. So that's why we also can put nuclear on a good light. So education and talk about the social impact, jobs, decent jobs, quality jobs, and biodiversity. And all of it together, I think, will also be convincing for the policymakers to be braver, as you mentioned.
Okay. So, thank you all for very interesting discussion, for open discussion. So let's applaud our speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Igor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Mr. Kumar. I worked with your
breathe energy. We depend on energy. We produce energy. We transform energy into brilliant ideas for a greener planet.